I'm Kat Hunt, and this is ClimateTech Roundup. I head up Earth Finance's Transition Finance and Climate Tech practice. In this series, we'll be talking about the trends, challenges, and opportunities facing climate tech today. So whether you're a climate tech innovator looking to commercialize at scale, or a corporate looking to successfully partner and integrate emerging technology into your operations, this series is for you. Let's dive in. Welcome to the second episode of Climate Tech Roundup. Any of us in the space know how real the climate tech valleys of death can be. Whether you're between fundraising cycles or trying to keep up with customer demand, this is where a lot of startups fall short in being able to scale operations. And we need these critical technologies in order to align with the Paris Agreement. So what we're going to be talking about today is what I believe is one of the most powerful climate finance mechanisms out there, outside of what we can do with debt and equity today: tax credit transferability. But first, let's cover the basics. What is tax credit transferability? The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 allowed for 11 different tax credits to become transferable so that the buyer, a corporate or an individual, can buy a tax credit that offsets their tax liability from a renewable energy producer, a climate tech, someone in the clean fuels or carbon sequestration space that produces a tax credit from their own eligible expenses. So the climate tech in this case can then use those proceeds from the tax credit to further scale or offset financing costs and other cash uses. So as a seller, what are the biggest opportunities from tax credit transferability for climate tech startups? One of the biggest challenges is getting your first facility up and running. So whether you're a hydrogen plant, anaerobic digester, or energy storage facility, these are really, really expensive projects, and having any kind of help on that for those CapEx is a huge plus. The IRA has provided two different tax credit mechanisms that support groups like ClimateTech decreasing their costs: the ITC and the PTC. So the ITC, the investment tax credit, are for these large investment CapEx projects like we discussed in these facility examples. It's 30% or more of eligible expenses that it covers, which is massively impactful, with different adders that we'll talk about later that can be added on to make that 30% an even greater number. And then there's the PTC, the production tax credit, which is measured by dollar amount per unit of production. So a certain amount of dollars per kilowatt hour, or clean fuel production, carbon sequestration, other clean technologies apply there. With these two combined, it's known to have decreased costs for climate tech by 40%. So really huge in getting climate technologies to market. Tax credit transfers, if it's not already obvious, are a really powerful climate finance mechanism for climate tech startups, but they're underutilized by climate tech startups today. It's really important to have a really thoughtful approach. So we're going to talk through some of the tips that we have for developing a tax credit transfer strategy. As we talked about in the first episode of Climate Tech Roundup, understanding your customer or your buyer from a corporation view. In this instance, we're assuming the same, corporation having the tax liability and being the buyer, may see a climate tech startup as a more risky seller than others. So understanding that lens, thinking about the clauses, the insurance that you can provide to de-risk as much as possible, is going to be a huge asset to bring to the negotiation table. Another tip to be mindful of are those adders I mentioned. So the ITC is 30%, and then there's those incremental 10% adders that you can add on to the bottom line of your tax credit. These takes a lot of upfront planning, one being domestic content, meaning that you need to source certain components domestically. Another is where you locate your project. So that's in energy communities or low income communities, which is great because you can benefit those communities and ensure just transition while adding to the bottom line of your tax credit. So with these adders and that base 30%, you can double your tax credit. And lastly, how can you use these funds to further your impact at scale? Clearly, having cash in hand for any startup, especially climate tech, is a huge bonus. So whether that's putting that towards your budget, a new initiative, or paying down financing costs, all great uses of these ITC proceeds. If you're able to, there's some creative ways to bring new investors to the table by de-risking their investment. One way we've seen this look is by being able to pay off a certain proportion of this investor's investment by a significant amount in years 1, 2, and 3. So say 25 to 50% of their investment paid off pretty immediately, really de-risks this as an investment area for them, especially for investors who'd like to get into climate tech, but doesn't necessarily match their risk profile, especially because climate tech is known to have longer payback periods, higher risk of not seeing a return on that investment. This is a great way to get new investors to the table, build trust, and maybe have investors for follow-on investment. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in a few weeks for the next installment of the ClimateTech Roundup. If you have any questions about what we discussed today, feel free to reach out to me directly at kat@earthfinance.com, and please check out the resources in the description below. Thanks.